He was kind to me in ways that were easy to explain. He remembered how I took my coffee. He made sure my phone was charged before we went out. If I mentioned needing something in passing, he usually followed through. Not immediately, not dramatically, but eventually. When we first started seeing each other, I told people it felt calm, safe. There was no rush, no intensity that burned too bright. He didn't overwhelm me with words or grand gestures. He showed up. He stayed. On quiet evenings, we sat side by side doing our own things. I read. He worked on his laptop. Sometimes our legs touched, and that was enough to make me feel like I wasn't alone. He didn't talk much about emotions. When I asked him about it, he smiled slightly and said, "I'm just not wired that way." I accepted that easily. It didn't sound like a refusal, just a fact. I remember thinking that love didn't have to be loud, that maybe this was what mature love looked like, steady, practical, undemanding. He never made me doubt that he cared. He just never made me feel swept up in it. At the time, I didn't think those two things were different. I told myself I was low maintenance. I didn't need constant reassurance. I didn't need long conversations about feelings. I didn't need to be texted all day or surprised with anything special. When he forgot to ask how my day was, I told myself he was tired. When he didn't notice when something was wrong, I reminded myself that he wasn't a mind reader. He shows love differently, I said more than once, to friends and to myself. Sometimes I rehearsed how I might ask for more. I'd imagine the conversation in my head, carefully choosing words that wouldn't sound needy or dramatic. And then I'd decide it wasn't worth it. I didn't want to be the person who made things complicated. So I adjusted, quietly. I stopped sharing small disappointments. I learned which topics led nowhere and avoided them. I measured my needs against his comfort and trimmed them down until they fit. When he did something affectionate, a hand on my back in public, a short message in the middle of the day, I held on to it longer than I should have. I replayed it, stretched it out in my mind. Gratitude slowly replaced desire. I was thankful for what I got, even when I wanted more. And because he never did anything wrong, I never felt justified in wanting more. His affection came in portions. Not absent, just limited. There were moments when he surprised me with tenderness, a quiet, "I'm glad you're here," a thoughtful favor I hadn't asked for. Those moments felt rare enough to matter, frequent enough to keep me hoping. They kept me believing that this was just how love worked with him, that warmth came in intervals, not waves. If I leaned into him emotionally, he leaned back just enough to stay balanced. He didn't withdraw completely, he just didn't follow me all the way. When I asked if something was wrong, he always answered calmly. "Nothing's wrong," he'd say. "I just need space sometimes." Or, "I'm just not very expressive, you know that." I did know that. I reminded myself of it constantly. Sometimes I wondered what it would feel like to be missed out loud, to have someone reach for me first, to be held without having to ask. But those thoughts felt indulgent, ungrateful. He wasn't distant in obvious ways. He didn't disappear. He didn't withhold. He simply stayed at a distance that never quite met me, and I learned how to meet him there. It happened on an ordinary night. We were in bed, lights off, the room quiet except for the hum of something outside. He was scrolling on his phone. I was staring at the ceiling, trying to decide if I was tired or just sad. I turned toward him and rested my head on his shoulder. He didn't move away. He didn't pull me closer, either. After a few minutes, I said softly, "Do you ever feel like we're distant?" He paused before answering, not long enough to seem evasive, just long enough to think. "I don't," he said. "I feel pretty comfortable." That word stayed with me. Comfortable. I waited for more, for a question back, for curiosity. It didn't come. "I just feel a little lonely sometimes," I said, already regretting it. He exhaled slowly. "I think you overthink things," he replied. "Nothing has really changed." The room felt very quiet after that. I realized then that I could be physically close to someone and still feel entirely on my own. That presence and connection weren't the same thing. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just lay there, listening to his breathing, understanding something I hadn't let myself name before. He wasn't withholding love. He was giving exactly as much as he had, and it wasn't enough for me. Leaving wasn't dramatic. There was no final conversation where everything came out, no moment where I felt brave or decisive. I simply reached a point where staying felt heavier than leaving. When I told him I needed to go, he looked surprised but not devastated. He asked if I was sure. I said yes. "I thought things were good," he said, not accusingly, just honestly. "They were," I replied, and I meant it. He hugged me before I left. It was the same kind of hug he'd always given me, gentle, brief, sincere. I walked away carrying a strange mix of grief and gratitude. Grief for what I wanted but never had. Gratitude for what was real, even if it was incomplete. Sometimes I still wonder if I asked for too much, if I should have been satisfied, if love in small portions is all some people can offer. I don't think he failed me, and I don't think I failed him. We just existed on different edges of the same feeling. And leaving wasn't about rejecting what we had. It was about admitting, quietly and honestly, that it wasn't enough to stay.